Yet again in awkward segues, to the best of my knowledge, our next presenter has absolutely nothing to do with the Dutch. I am happy to welcome the editor-in-chief of Popular Science. Please welcome Jake Ward.
Hey, cheers everybody. Cheers. Tossing booze into my job is the best, man. It is the best when you combine science and booze. I am I have a kind of a morbid sensibility about me. I like tales of sort of death and danger and bad decisions that humans make, kind of wandering out into bad places. This is sort of one of my personal interests, and so I'm always sort of looking for. I've been looking for a way to tell that story, and I've sort of bumped into it. I'm just throwing this up here because it was something I have a whole talk, but this is something I bumped into the other day that we ran on popularscience.com. The world's population in 2000 by latitude, right? Here is, sorry, am I right about this, right? Here's the equator. No. Yeah, thank you, right? Help me. Jesus, right? I don't know anything about science. What are you going to do? Hi. What's crazy about it is just how many people live this close to the equator. Basically, how many people live in a warm environment, and it's something I sort of got really fixated on because I was very taken with the book "The World Without Us," where suddenly, if humans vaporized, what would happen to the built landscape was kind of that theme. My theme is kind of the opposite. What if all of the built stuff, what if all technology went away all of a sudden, and we were left without all these tasteful outfits you're wearing and my watch and blah blah blah? Like, what would happen to human beings, basically? And I would like to point out that, say it again?
We'd have to talk.
Yeah, well, that's certainly true. We would have to talk. But a lot of you would be dead. Hello. Living here, why would we live here? It's freezing. There's no way. Living without clothes, you can't do it. So there's this incredible sort of chunk of the population that lives really close to the equator. I just find that pretty interesting. Anyway, this is sort of a book I'm working on, basically, and it's about the growing gap between what humans are capable of and what our technology and machines are capable of. And I'm working with various titles, so I'll run them by you here. I'm sort of road testing it. Envelope, the edge of human survival. It's sort of dramatic, it has a quality about it. Speed limit, a little wordy. Nausea, chills, and other important evolutionary messages. But for the purpose of a drinking crowd like this, let's just call this, oh fuck. The limits of the human body. So, now let's get dark. Ready? This is a professional golfer who's a very beloved guy on the PGA circuit named Payne Stewart, and was best known for sort of dressing up sort of in turn-of-the-century garb and wore sort of cool things. Nice guy by all accounts. And on October 25th, 1999, he got on a plane with his two agents, a golf course designer who was designing a golf course for him in Dallas, and a captain and a first officer. And they were going from Orlando to Dallas in the LEARJET 35, which is an incredible piece of machinery. This is an unbelievable plane. Cruises at 530 miles an hour, can barrel roll. I mean, you can dogfight in this mother. It's unbelievable what this thing can do. It can climb at 4,000 feet a minute. You can do barrel rolls, all kinds of amazing things. Anyway, a Model 36, which is very similar, set a round the world record at one point. So they boarded this very plane. There's a shot of it on the morning that it was going to go, and took off from Orlando. So when you fly, you're constantly under the supervision of an air traffic controller in a region, basically. As you traverse the country, you're being handed off from one controller to the next. So in the end, you do whatever they say, because that's the key to an air traffic control system. Is there's nobody wandering around. You get told where to go, and you go there. So the Jacksonville controller was in charge of this plane as it took off from Orlando, and they ordered them to climb from 26,000 feet to 39,000 feet. They leveled out, they gave another instruction, and there was no response. Nobody radioed back. The air traffic controller continues to mic up and try and get feedback 5 times in 4 minutes. And at that point, you scramble a fighter jet. Because once no one's responding, suddenly you've got a gas-laden jet going God knows where, sort of out of radio contact. So they immediately get this training pilot out of Elgin Air Force Base in Florida. He just happens to be on the runway at the time. This is the procedure that the FAA sets up. They send him up because he's the first, the guy with his foot on the, he's got the yoke and is ready to go. They send him up and he does a visual inspection of the plane. And what he reports in getting alongside it is the engines are going fine, no problem. But he gets in there like it's going straight and true. It's on autopilot. But he says, I can't see in the windows. I don't have any idea, what's going on inside because the windows are all blacked out. And air traffic controllers know that that means that they are iced over from the inside. And that means a loss of cabin pressure. When they talk about that on the plane, pay attention because this is really important stuff when they say, in case of a sudden loss of cabin pressure, this is a really big deal because very quickly you, as a passenger, succumb to hypoxia. The lack of oxygen to the brain, it hits you it hits you and you lose cogency very, very quickly. It's just a really, really dangerous thing. And within a few minutes of the breach, basically what had happened is that the plane had lost pressure, and somehow they weren't warned of it. The oxygen mask didn't drop for some reason, and so they, undoubtedly everybody was dead on board. So they continued. They were supposed to make this turn right here, out of Orlando. They were supposed to go all the way across to Dallas, and that was it. Instead, they continued for 1,500 miles. For 4 hours on a full tank of gas on autopilot, went all the way to North Dakota, and finally ran out of gas at that point. Trailed the whole time by fighter jets, which are making sure, trying to make the decision at that point, okay, are we going to shoot it down? Okay, no, we're going over Chicago, we're going over, these various places. So they don't do that. They let it run out of gas, and it ended, it crashes. It got into an uncontrolled descent and crashed outside Mina, North Dakota. Sorry, South Dakota. And I became obsessed with this story, basically, because everything else on board that plane was fine. Functioning, no problem, right? The ice maker is probably clinking away. There's, who knows, maybe the in-flight movies could have been going. It's the people that were the failure. That's it. And it got me to this place of realizing, like, humans are the weak link in all mechanical activity and all technology. We are the little fragile bunnies that make all of these things, that fail, basically. And so the big question was, what are our limits? This is sort of the thing. At Popular Science, we're always geeking out on, like, how fast could you go, or how far could you go, or, like, wouldn't that be cool if you could, accelerate this thing? And always the answer is, you can't do that with a person inside. There's no way. It adds a whole other layer of engineering to the development of a technology to deal with the pain in the ass of people being on board. It's terrible, it's just impossible. But there are some noble people who establish these limits, and this is the guy, John Stapp, personal hero of mine. Colonel John Stapp of the U.S. Air Force. He was a career officer, a flight surgeon. He died in 1999. He began his research in 1947 at a time when people believed that 18 Gs, right, the force of gravity on you as you are propelled through space, that 18 Gs would kill anybody. That was the assumption coming out of World War II. And he actually was the first guy to actually use the term Murphy's Law in an interview. So the idea that anything that can go wrong will go wrong. He was the first guy to ever sort of refer to that in an interview, and all the reporters said, I don't know what that is. And now that's become this sort of engineering truism. Because his job was going up against the toughest stuff you could sort of go up against, see what the limits of the human body could do, because he was convinced that the body could take more than 18 Gs. So what he did was built a test system at what is now Edwards Air Force Base called the Sonic Wind. So here he is, rocketing across I mean, that's him. That's the guy, Colonel John Stapp, the flight surgeon, because who the fuck else is going to get in this thing, right? Nobody's going to do that. He was a maniac. And what's cool about him is that he, I'll show you a photo of him later, like, he does not look like a maniac. His most famous thing, and this is what's so cool about him, is that, if you put me in charge of this project, my first instinct would be like, how fast can we go? Let's do this, And instead, his was, how fast can we decelerate? Because he wanted, again, know what G's could do. So he built this 2,000-foot standard gauge railroad in the middle of the desert, strapped rockets on the back of this frickin' thing, and would get on and then hit a body of water that slowed him down instantaneously. This is him, right? No helmet. What's he doing? It's unbelievable. Anyway, he hits the water, right? Boom, and comes to an instantaneous stop. 46.3 Gs this man withstood himself. And it's horrible because he would consistently break his ribs, his eyes would blow out, he'd lose his vision. Yeah, you're right. That's right. Thank this man. Because the result of his... Yeah, exactly. Hey! Isn't that great? I love it. But, you know, here he is, and here's his work attire. Right? Hi, I'm John Stapp, Colonel of the U.S. Air Force. And you can watch these newsreel footage of him talking about it where he's just like, you know, well, this is our flight, you know, and so we say farewell to Colonel, you know, it's all that sort of even-keeled kind of 1950s and 60s kind of talk, but this guy was a badass mother, you know? Toughest guy in the world. Anyway, he established all kinds of things that you and I rely on all the time right now. For instance, he determined that airplane seats should not be built to an 18 G standard, because it turns out that when you assume that everyone's going to die at 18 Gs, it gives you, as an airline, an easy way to say, oh, well, then we won't build the seats to withstand more than 18 Gs. And so they can put them really close together and all this different stuff. And he was like, no, 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 no. I took 46.3. It turns out now the accepted limit is 32, which is, you know, so they bolt the things into the floor in a new way because of what he did. He also established that the absolutely safest position for anyone to be in, and anyone here who's a parent of a young kid in a car seat knows this, is backwards. You should, on a plane, be seating backwards. The airlines know this, but they don't do that, because who's going to pay to go sit, you know, riding backwards the whole time? You know, thanks with my drink, you know, or whatever, like, yeah, no thanks. So, anyway, his work was so unbelievable that he was on the cover of Time in 1955. I love these covers, God. Anyway, there are very few places where you and I can experience the kind of limits that Colonel Stapp and other people in the military are, well, basically, the only place that humans are regularly subjected to the sort of limits of this stuff is in military aviation. And this is sort of a classic example of it. This is the approach pattern that you get into when you're trying to avoid ground fire. You and I, when we fly into SFO or whatever, you know, it's this long, slow descent. But in a military condition, you don't want that because people can line up on you as you approach. So instead, you corkscrew down in this nightmare way onto the deck, and Iraq is famous for that. The civilian airliners at the Iraq airport would do that pattern to get in there. But there was one place until 1996 where a civilian could experience that, and it's called Kai Tak Airport. There was an approach at the Kai Tak Airport on runway 13 where you would get right into the neighborhood, basically, of this thing, and really experience, you know, just barely, but almost experience what a plane can really do. So if you check out the size of this engine, right, and then here's a car, right, these are really only about, that's 300 feet, you know, 350 feet apart, something like that. People who flew on this, I interviewed all these different flight attendants and passengers and so forth, and they all just said it was a nightmare. You could see the wash on people's, you know, houses and stuff, just unbelievable. Anyway, by the time you get to this point, you have already done this horrible turn. And when airline pilots are being trained, they're taught to obey a limit as to how far they turn. 12.5 degrees is the bank angle you're supposed to get to, and then stop, because everybody throws up otherwise. You and I are all very pukey, right? I'm very pukey. And they cut it off right there. So this one, in order to get there, had to get around a mountain. Yeah. And does 25 degrees, between 25 and 35 degrees. What he's basically trying to do is get around this certain mountain. He's basically going through this cut, and then he banks and banks and banks until this is lined up nicely in this checkerboard is lined up nicely in his window, and then he touches it down. So here's what it looks like when this happens. Here's just a normal sort of calm day. This is the nicest kind of way you could touch down in Kai Tak. Imagine, right? You know. It's crazy. So everyone at that point is screaming. You know, who knows what's happening inside the plane at that point? The real problem is that you basically have this. Once you've done that lineup and you straighten out, look how close he gets to the freeway, and he's right in the buildings. Yep, right. Any little movement one way or the other is a bad idea. And then he's basically just got to cut the power and get down there. You don't really get a second shot at it because you lose all of your momentum with that turn. So that's a calm day. Here is what's more typical when you get the crosswinds across the runway coming out of Hong Kong Harbor. You've lost your forward momentum so much coming out of this. This is a slightly different angle that you begin to drift in 3D. Right? You've gone around. Your tail goes out. Watch this. I know it's not the greatest resolution, but watch how much he loses the tail. The body is not lined up with the runway right now. Still drifting, still drifting, still drifting, right? He's losing it completely. And then boom, and you hit down, and that the touching of the tarmac is what straightens the whole thing out. You know, at which point the one flight attendant told me that everybody pukes at that point. That is the moment, right? And as a result, you know, and then she probably comes on and says, you know, welcome to Hong Kong, where the local time is, blah, 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 you know, where the stuff is. So, when you look at, how am I doing on time? I'm all right, okay. This is a test of a Boeing I think it's a 757, I'm not sure actually, but it's a standard test they do when they do a new line of planes. And every, you know, other plane basically goes through this. They test the structural integrity of the wings. This is being bent, right? The wings are being bent up here to see how far they can go before they lose structural integrity. And what's crazy about it is, like, if you've ever, you know, I fly at least twice a month, and I just like put on my iPad, just don't even think about it. I just like turn it all off, you know, or try and go to sleep or whatever, because the more I think about it, the more crazy it makes me. But when you look out the window right on a plane, you see the wing doing this, you think, oh my God, we're all going to die. No, you're fine. Like, the plane cannot break in the air, basically. It's designed to be able to do almost anything. The problem is the people, right? It turns out that being a flight attendant is one of the most dangerous jobs you can do. Since 2009, 49 crew members and not 14 passengers were injured in turbulence. Because every so often, right, when they tell you, you know, keep your seatbelt fastened, even when the seatbelt sign is not illuminated, do that. Because without warning, you know, you can hit a wind shear or whatever. In 1997, there was this famous case of a flight from Tokyo to Hawaii. They took off from Narita, and they hit a wind shear, and the drinks cart goes into the roof, and a passenger was killed, thrown into the ceiling, right? There's a really common thing statistically, I mean, it's not really common, but it's a common thing statistically speaking. And again, it's because of the fuzzy little bunnies that we are in a, you know, crazy piece of you know, mechanical engineering. So my point here is, this is normal. Totally fine for the wing. The wing is literally designed to travel 25 feet from the point of rest before it loses structural integrity. This is not normal. You know, the idea that we're going to sort of sit here and have some champagne and some canapes and the rest of it. No, she should be sitting backwards. Personally, I would like some drugs. I'd like to be sedated. You know, again, normal, right? Wind shears, totally normal. There's that kind of wind shear where suddenly you lose lift under the wings and you go down. Not normal. You know. What I've become sort of fascinated by is the idea that we're all like, yeah, you know, we're way out of the edge of our life. And, you know, I surf a little bit, I do a little bit of extreme sort of stuff, but nothing. You know, the deeper I get into this, the more of just a pansy I'm becoming, because it just turns out that, like, humans shouldn't really be out there. The human body is not engineered for this, is basically the point. So just a quick run through of just sort of some military research. Here's you know, we know these limits based on what military researchers go through. This is a G-lock training. He's getting spun on a centrifuge. He's hitting 8 Gs, only 8 Gs, and he's trying not to faint. You know, his eyes are being pushed back, and they teach you to clench your butt and try and get the blood to remain up in your torso as much as possible. This is standard training for the U.S. Air Force and for astronaut training. Here's, right now, if it were me, right, I would look at this guy and I'd be like, no way. Right? And then you go, Sorry. And then this guy, I'm like, yeah, sure, that guy looks like he could make it, you know. So, same kind of deal. Centrifuge.
Okay, squeeze the handbrake. Handbrake is activated. Work hard. 3, 2, 1, engage. Legs tight, deep breath. You're on top, breathe. 1, 2, breathe. Drop the shoulders, breathe. 1, 2, breathe. Squeeze your legs, squeeze your butt. Hey, squeeze, keep squeezing, keep squeezing,
And he faints. Very common. This is a really common thing for an Air Force cadet to go through.
How you doing?
My wife is in the audience tonight, so I'm ashamed to admit that I'm actually going to try and go do civilian astronaut training along these lines, and I am totally going to be this guy. I am 100% going to faint out G-lock. We owe this kind of stuff to Robert Barani, who was a Viennese physician who basically, he sort of set the stage for a lot of what we understand about balance and nausea. That's one of the big themes right now. Like, it turns out that you know, a military deployment, right? A platoon of guys with guns jumping out of a helicopter. If they have a cold, if they have, you know, dysentery, all those things, they can totally fight. Doesn't matter. But if they have motion sickness, they are done. It's the #1 sort of thing that no one can really resist, and it's part of, you know, basically Robert Barani. He sort of set the stage for our understanding of this. He sort of learned how to mess with vertigo. He was playing with somebody's ears. I don't know why they let doctors just do this in the 19th century, but he was like squeezing fluid into somebody's ears who was having vertigo spells, and he discovered that if it was above a certain temperature, it instilled a sense of vertigo, and the spins were going one way, and if he put one below a certain temperature and put it in there, it would go the other way, because the little hairs in your inner ear respond one way or the other. You know, will contract or expand depending on how much you know, what the temperature is. So, you know, he's kind of a cruel guy. Here's his other great invention, was the Barani chair. This is now a standard thing that they do as part of U.S. Air Force cadet training. Basically, they spin you in, spin you in, spin you in, and then say, you know, where is the puppy, or, you know, whatever the test is here. So, you know, for me, I just sort of, I look across the world of sort of, you know, how you and I sort of move around, that, you know, I'm going to get in a car tonight and drive back to Oakland in this, like, you know, just this happy little cocoon moving way faster than we're supposed to, you know, in any real way. And I'm just, it's fascinating to look at the ways that we have begun to subdivide otherwise pretty normal things. These are my favorites. Lateral acceleration, right? Going this way. Linear acceleration. In the John Stapp thing. Bank angle. That's a nice one. That's the Kaitak approach, right? And this is my favorite. Jerk. It's totally, this is like a standard issue scientific term for literally like, blah, you know, and your coffee goes flying, the whole thing. So when you look across all of these things and all of the research that people have been doing to make it possible for you and I to just enjoy ourselves and sip our champagne on a plane, you know, my point is, this is a miracle. Your life is a miracle. It's amazing. And when you look across all of the technologies that we depend on, right? HVAC, prostheses, eyeglasses, all of these things. A nice warm jacket, which my wife was so kind to bring me tonight. You know, these things we rely on in a really fundamental way because, again, we are fuzzy little bunnies, and your life is amazing. So, thanks a lot, guys.